Hi everyone, and welcome to my new moon in Scorpio forecast, which is going to look at the market surrounding Bitcoin for the next 2 weeks. So that's for the waxing moon cycle that starts on the 4th of November and runs through to the lunar eclipse that we have on November the 19th, when we move into eclipse season 2.0. So I thought I'd start with the Bitcoin chart in relation to Halloween, because of course it's well known within markets that there is sometimes this Halloween effect that happens as a result of kind of moving into the latter part of the year and the kind of festive season, and how very often this kind of sees a bump in the market. So it's kind of interesting that on the day of Halloween, sort of Samhain or All Saints Day, we had a couple of interesting things happening in relation to Bitcoin in particular, which I think could potentially have a sort of a Halloween effect, if you like. So I thought, we'd just kind of look at that, and then we'd move into the new moon forecast, because obviously that's going to look at the next 2 weeks. So it kind of comes very soon after Halloween, just a couple of days, and so I think that the influences that we see at Halloween, they may also be important when it comes to the new moon kind of transits. So anyway, yes, I think that one of the most important things about this particular Halloween chart, and you can see it's the blue circle that's on the outside. The Bitcoin chart is the green chart in the middle. So one of the most important things about it is that Mercury, which is sitting in the late degrees of Libra, is making approaching a trine to Jupiter, and you can see Jupiter here at 22 degrees of Aquarius, which, as I've said, is the sign of kind of humanity and of kind of altruism, and is very closely associated with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has it on the descendant. So a lot of people feel that Bitcoin has this potential to do altruistic things for mankind. It can bring about potentially world peace. It can also if we listen to Jordan Lindsay, provide the basis for generational wealth, which could, in turn, really make a huge difference to people's quality of life, and mean that they can sort of opt out of what is essentially the rat race. So it's interesting that we've got this approaching trine as as we hit Halloween, this approaching trine between Mercury and Jupiter, and of course Mercury is it made the exact trine a day later on the 1st of November, so kind of just as we started a new month. And very, very auspicious combination of planets. Jupiter in and of itself, as we know, is particularly auspicious. It does tend to expand. It tends to elevate. It also tends to make us think in terms of the bigger picture, kind of the philosophy, kind of spirituality, our beliefs, essentially. And Mercury tends to be, although we tend to see it in terms of communication and policy, that kind of thing, Mercury has always had a very strong link to markets and to buying and selling. Mercury was certainly, during the sort of the classical period, was associated with all kinds of markets and commerce, because it involves an exchange between two parties. So it's not just about exchanging ideas, but it can also be about exchanging goods or exchanging money, that kind of thing. And here we've got Mercury sitting in the Bitcoin fourth house, sort of a couple of degrees from its IC, making this beautiful trine to Jupiter in the house of all stakeholders of Bitcoin, essentially, those people that really kind of buy into Bitcoin or the Bitcoin philosophy. And so I really think that this coincided with the announcement of that new fund, the 1031 fund, which is run by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. And unlike other venture capitalist funds, the idea is to try and generate any profits that are generated will be plowed back into Bitcoin development and layer 2 development. So in other words, Lightning and other applications that will sit on top of the blockchain. And so really, really good news. It was, I think, very well received by the sort of long-standing Bitcoin community, and I really feel that it's timed interestingly to fit in with this fantastic aspect. Now, what I find also interesting, which I thought it might be quite fun to have a look at the 1031 chart, and what I find so interesting is that as we'll see, it was filed, it did its SEC filing on the 10th of June 2021, which is the same days that we had that solar eclipse in Gemini, and that had a very, very strong Mercury signature to it. So I find that so fascinating, and I thought, just like I did with sort of last month when I looked at the chart briefly for the new Bitcoin ETF, the Bitcoin Strategy Fund, it might be quite fun to have a quick look at the chart for the 1031 fund as well. So we'll do that in a minute. But yes, I think, with such kind of good news, kind of setting up the sort of the Halloween effect, if you like, from the position of the fourth house, which, as I said, is about kind of roots and the fundamentals of Bitcoin. So about development, it's about grassroots. This kind of came out of it was very much done in deference to the publishing of Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin white paper, which was done on Halloween 2008, and so it's a fantastic nod to him, the name of the company and everything, but it also comes out of that grassroots community that's been involved in the kind of cypherpunk movement, sort of almost from the beginning. So there's a lovely sense of kind of lineage or heritage here, but also the sense of taking things forward. If we think about the fact that Mercury, in the chart, it sits here kind of on the descendant, so it does want to kind of engage and connect with the Bitcoin community and with stakeholders in a very kind of open way. And I think it's interesting that one of the manifesto points that they've sort of put up as kind of giving an idea of their values is that they do want to sort of see the development of Bitcoin and of DeFi as being about rules, not rulers. So I think that's really, really interesting, because Aquarius is a very egalitarian sign, and so to have Mercury in Aquarius in the Bitcoin chart, I think does point to that sort of that desire for kind of open source and for collaboration as a model for moving Bitcoin forward and for kind of keeping the community engaged. So yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. And then of course, Jupiter rules the sixth house of the Bitcoin chart, and that is all about, the kind of the inner workings, the day-to-day workings, the health of Bitcoin. So I think, again, this idea that the fund is plowing funds back into the Bitcoin development community is kind of ensuring that that Bitcoin has got longevity, that there will always be a kind of a development community that can afford to spend time really, kind of securing Bitcoin, making sure that privacy is sort of working, and fixing any, potential kind of problems that come up, along the way. Which is interesting, because if we look at the new moon chart, which, as I say, is only a couple of days later, so not much will have moved really. Only the sun, which will have moved on 4 degrees, and the moon, which will have now come up to the sign of Scorpio. Very little else will have changed. That we do have a square here between the luminaries at the new moon, which is also in the fourth house, so also kind of emphasizing fundamentals and this idea of kind of getting the roots and the foundations right, so that Bitcoin has longevity. It can grow tall, it can grow like a tree, it can sort of really grow a nice thick trunk, it can spread out, and it can then form shelter for a lot more people than, if it was kind of a weakly sapling that wasn't quite getting its nutrients or wasn't being well attended to, if you want to use the kind of gardening metaphor. But it is making a square, it's applying to a square to Saturn, and Saturn, as we can see here, is sitting in around about 7 degrees of Aquarius, and it's approaching this conjunction to the descendant. And as I've said elsewhere, for me this is very much to do with the entry of institutions into the market, which, as I said, I think long term will mean less volatility with as far as Bitcoin kind of fluctuations in price is concerned, and that it is something that people like Radical Root are seeing long term anyway, as far as volatility is concerned. That it is declining kind of with every 4-year cycle. Volatility does decline. So having Saturn on the descendant, as I say, I think will stabilize volatility kind of long term. But of course, with Saturn also comes rules, restrictions, regulations, and a slight conservatism, which is obviously stands in contrast to this Uranus-ruled descendant, and the kind of Uranian idea of kind of libertarianism, freedom of the individual, kind of anti-tax, very pro-DeFi, not wanting centralization, whereas, say, Saturn tends to like centralization because that's how you can form consensus around rules, laws, etc. So, I think it's important to sort of consider this because Uranus and Saturn are both very prominent at this new moon, which I see as a kind of a gateway sort of lunar phase as we move into eclipse season 2.0. And as you know, for me, eclipse seasons, particularly solar eclipses, begin 6-month cycles. So we're kind of moving into a new 6-month cycle as we kind of enter that sort of corridor from the lunar eclipse on the 19th of November, and then towards the December solar eclipse, which will happen on the 4th of December, and it will happen in the sign of Sagittarius, so the opposite sign to Gemini, which is where we had the last solar eclipse. But now what's interesting, as I say, is that we've got Uranus prominent and we've got Saturn prominent at this new moon, and I think this is foreshadowing the effect that the final square between Saturn and Uranus will form towards the end of the year. As I've said kind of elsewhere, the major sort of transit of 2021 has been these squares between Saturn and Uranus, which we had in mid-February, we had mid-June, and then we will have again on the 24th of December. And of course, this is interesting because it coincides with what many think is going to be possibly a taper tantrum, particularly in US stock markets, as a result of announcements that may be made today from the Federal Reserve concerning the tapering of kind of pandemic kind of era support through bond buying. So many people think that interest rates, may rise. I mean, the Fed has pretty much said that it's going to raise interest rates at least once in 2022 and then possibly twice in 2023. We're waiting to hear from the Bank of England, and they will make the announcement on, the new moon. So they may also kind of change their policy, although it does seem as though Europeans generally are being a little bit more kind of conservative about raising interest rates. I think it's fascinating that Mercury will have moved from that beautiful trine that it's made to Jupiter at Halloween to the square to Pluto. And again, for me, Pluto in particular is about kind of subterfuge, machinations behind the scenes, control, manipulation, so it can be like market manipulation by bigger players, as well as this desire for power and for control, kind of plutocratic types of maneuvers. So, I don't think that is a coincidence. But I think overall, I'm not really expecting, in terms of market sentiment, I think that even though we had this really nice Halloween bump, I think that in the short term, during this cycle, this is quite a fraught cycle. If we think about an opposition to Uranus, which is quite unpredictable and can raise tension, and then we've got the square to Saturn, which tends to want to sort of dampen down sentiment and be a little bit sort of stern and serious and responsible. I don't really see this 2-week cycle as being particularly likely to produce buoyant, bullish market sentiment. I think it's more than likely going to sort of coincide with a little correction, if you like. And I think that's perfectly in keeping with what Jordan Lindsay was saying when he thought that there might be a wave 2 correction around about the 9th of November, which fits quite well with the astrology, actually. Let me just show you, because next week we've got some slightly difficult aspects happening. So if we switch to the calendar, here is the new moon here, and we can see that the sun will be opposite Uranus, on that day exactly, and then we move into some quite positive energy as the planets change signs. So Mercury will move into Scorpio, Venus will move into Capricorn, and then we've got a beautiful Mercury-Venus sextile on Saturday the 6th, which is very, very positive. So maybe a short-term bump, but then we move into the following week. And as we get to the 10th, we see Mars approaching, first of all, a conjunction to Mercury, and then making a square, both of them, to Saturn. So to me, that's usually putting on the brakes. It's a slowing down. It's kind of throwing obstacles in the road, and it's definitely a killer of momentum, if you like. So I do expect that next week things could get a little bit, that sentiment could sort of dampen down a little bit, and we might see people taking the foot off the gas a bit and moving to the brakes. And then, things could improve the following week as we move into the gateway to that eclipse that we've got on the 19th, which is one of the signature transits for it is that beautiful trine between Venus and Uranus. So a lot of positive aspects in the lead up to that. Mars making an opposition to Uranus on the 17th. So essentially the Wednesdays, which are usually high volume trading days actually for Bitcoin. So both the 10th and the 17th, I think things could be a little bit volatile, and we could see, sort of a bit of a dampening down overall in terms of sort of sentiment or kind of activity. And then moving back to the charts, I thought let's move on to the 1031 chart, which I think is so interesting. I've chosen the date of its SEC filing, which happens to be the 10th of June 2021, and this is the exact day of the solar eclipse that we had in Gemini. So fascinating. And we can see that it's got Virgo rising and Pisces on the descendant. So we've got Neptune and Jupiter in Pisces, because Jupiter briefly changed signs back in May. In fact, the time that we had the Bitcoin crash, Jupiter changed signs the very next day. So kind of interesting that we've got Jupiter in the 6th and Neptune in the 7th here. And they are making, certainly Neptune is anyway, it's making that square, that T-square, the square anyway, to the Sun and the Moon, which has got Mercury in the middle. So again, an interesting, as I was saying, about a very, very strong Mercury signature, which we're seeing in this chart. So we've got sort of a stellium of planets. We've got the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, and the North Node all in Gemini, as well as the midheaven for the chart. So a very strong Mercury signature here, Mercury being the planet that's going to sort of determine direction of travel. So I think it's no coincidence that that the sort of formal announcement to the public was made on, as I say, very close to that Mercury Jupiter trine. So yes, I think that's beautiful and poetic. We've got some other interesting things kind of happening here. We've got the ascendant, the IC-MC axis sitting very close to the nodes, which is fascinating. So a very destined kind of organization, very much driven, kind of fate-driven, if you like. So I think it's probably not a coincidence that they chose their filing, for the 10th of June. I think it's, definitely a nod to the astrology and to all of that. And then what else have we got going on? We've got Mercury's also the chart ruler, actually, because it rules Virgo as well as Gemini. So Mercury very, very strong here, and in T-squared to Neptune, which at the time I said was going to sort of cause a lot of fear, doubt, and confusion in the markets, and that definitely turned out to be the case. We had all that sort of business about Bitcoin and energy. Then we had kind of countries kind of making noises about regulating or banning Bitcoin. Then we had the sort of Evergrande saga, which was also very at around about the time of the lunar phases that were in Virgo and Pisces. So there's similar kind of access to this. So Neptune has been causing all sorts of mischief, over the last kind of year or so. So it is interesting that we've got this this T-square with Neptune, the Earth, and Mercury, and then also the part of fortune. I think this is also a very nice testimony of good fortune, if you like, to have the part of fortune rising with the ascendant. So I do think that overall the fund is going to do very well. The part of fortune is generally the place where people tend to benefit materially from whatever they're doing. So I think that their kind of aims and where they tend to benefit are one and the same. And so, Virgo is very much about service, it's about helping others, it's about kind of modesty, it's about sort of the everyday, and also about detail. So all those things, but kind of over and above everything, it's about service. So I think it's beautiful that I think that the astrology really backs up their kind of ethos, if you like, which is, as I say, about helping Bitcoin developers rather than taking profits. And yes, and I think also nice to have Jupiter as ruler of the IC down the bottom here, because it suggests that at root, at base, they are an altruistic organization that does want to do, that sees themselves as being kind of devoted to the greater good, if you like. So I think that's really beautiful. We've also got Uranus in the 9th house, so again emphasizing this idea of Uranus in the Bitcoin chart, that's in terms of their sort of overall ethos and beliefs, that they really see themselves as dovetailing with the ethos of Bitcoin, you know, in terms of freedom, in terms of, as I say, all those kind of libertarian types of values. And, you know, it's fascinating that Uranus and Venus here are kind of in sextile. So Venus in Cancer, which is all about family, actually. It's about the security of family. It's about the sort of valuing of those qualities as well, you know, of home, of family, of security, that kind of thing, which I think is quite beautiful. So that those two things sort of dovetailing. And I think you can see this in a little film that that Swan Finance put up on the YouTube channel, which is all about Bitcoin as hope, Bitcoin as generational wealth, and potentially sort of something that could kind of change the course of humanity for the better. So I think that's quite lovely. Venus, you know, in this chart rules the 2nd house as well, so it is about value and about security, and it also rules the 9th house. So again, very, very fitting that we've got you know, this dovetailing of beliefs and of philosophy with overall aims and goals and future direction of travel. So along with values and money, you know, how we kind of earn money. So quite a lovely chart, I think. And yeah, I think it's also interesting that it's a lot of mutable energy, a lot of mutable air. So to me, that also talks about an organization that's very much that has a flat structure, that's open to discussion and debate, that does things, you know, like they say, by kind of through consensus rather than through kind of a dictatorial type of management structure, and where they're sort of open and fluid in terms of adopting new technologies or new ways of doing things if something isn't working, which I think is ultimately, you know, a positive trait. So that's all I really wanted to say at this point. I hope it's been helpful and that you got something out of it. As I say, I think this is going to be another one of those mixed bags in terms of kind of overall trends, because we are seesawing between positive Jupiter energy and the somewhat more nefarious energy of Pluto again. So this is very similar to September and October. So yeah, hope that's helpful. All the best, happy trading, and I'll catch you again in a couple of weeks.